Good evening. Tonight's lesson, the title of tonight's lesson is Flip the Script, Writing the Narrative of Your Own Life. This week's Parshas Vayakel, which discusses the whirlwind of activity that surrounded the building of the Mishkan. And in some respect, it's just a repetition of this that is described in the Torah and Parshas Truma and Parshas Tetzaveh, about how, in fact, the Torah was, the Mishkan was actually constructed, ultimately. So, Moshe gives the command, and Moshe tells the people it's time to build the Mishkan. The people are galvanized, and they all come together, they reach deep into their pockets, they contribute generously, and they form the new house of God. In text 1a, every man whose heart uplifted him came, and everyone whose spirit inspired him to generosity brought the offering of God for the work of the tent of meeting, for all of its service, and for the holy garments. The men came with the women. Every generous-hearted person brought bracelets and earrings and rings and buckles, all kinds of golden objects, and every man who waved a waving of gold to God. And every man with whom was found blue, purple, or crimson wool, linen, goat hair, ram skins dyed red, or tachash skins, brought them. Everyone who set aside an offering of silver or copper brought the offering for God, and everyone with whom acacia wood was found for any work of the service brought it. And every wise-hearted woman spun with her hands, and they brought spun material, blue, purple, and crimson wool and linen. Rashi actually comments that the women had this unique gift that they knew how to spin the wool while it was still on the animal, so the wool would actually stay fresh. It wasn't something that they cut off first. They actually did it while it was on the animal, which is an incredible feat. That's Rashi points this out. And all the women whose hearts uplifted them with wisdom spun the goat hair. And the princes brought the shoham stones and filling stones for the ephod and for the choshen, and the spice and the oil for lighting and for the anointing oil and for the incense. Every man and woman whose heart inspired them to generosity, to bring all of the work that God had commanded to make through Moshe, the children of Israel brought a gift for God. So the plans are drawn, the materials are all delivered to the correct supply depots, and the assembly teams are all in order. And now it's time for the construction of the tabernacle to begin, and this is all under the leadership of Betzalel and Aholiav. Betzalel was from very great lineage, and Aholiav was from Shevet Dan, which wasn't exactly the best lineage, ancestry. And God wanted a full spectrum of representation in terms of creating the Mishkan, so that nobody should think that only the people with great ancestry have a connection to the Mishkan. So here it is in text number 1b. The Torah describes it, Betzalel and Aholiav, and every wise-hearted man into whom God has imbued wisdom and insight to know how to do shall do all the work of the service of the holy, according to all that God has commanded. And Moshe called Betzalel and Aholiav, and every wise-hearted man into whose heart God had given wisdom, everyone whose heart lifted him up to approach the work to do it. So they took from before Moshe all the offerings that the children of Israel had brought for the work of the service of the holy, and they brought him more gifts every morning. Then all the wise men who were doing the work of the holy came, each one from his work, which they had been doing. And they spoke to Moshe, saying, the people are bringing very much, more than is enough for the labor of the articles which the Lord has commanded us to do. So in other words, they came to Moshe to say, enough already, there's so much supply, there's not enough demand. We don't need all of this. So Moshe commanded, and they announced in the camp, saying, let no man or woman do any more work for the offering for the holy. So the people stopped bringing. And the work was sufficient for them, for all the work, to do it and to leave over. So imagine that. Here you have a Jewish communal building campaign, without any YouTube videos, without any drones hovering over the construction spot, watching, some men and women standing with construction hats and smiling as they're putting in the shovel. None of that. There were no campaigns like that, and they didn't have to send around WhatsApp and charity links for charity.com. All Moshe had to do was say, let's bring the stuff for the Mishkan, and it all came filing in, and there was so much that they had to actually say, you know what, enough already. So it would seem that this was an ideal scenario. So this is the plain meaning that we would assume based on just the written text. But if we look in the oral tradition, the Talmud and the Medrash, there's a whole nother layer of stuff that's going on over here. And it's not so straightforward. The building of the Mishkan didn't come along, wasn't free of conspiracy theories and jealousy and mockery and things like that. Let's take a look in text number 2a. Here, the Medrash tells us that there were rabble-rousers amongst the Jewish people who spread all kinds of rumors and conspiracy theories about the project CEO, which was Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses. And so they actually brazenly accused Moshe of pocketing funds that were dedicated for the Mishkan. Let's take a look in text number 2a. Rabbi Chama said, one would say, look how thick is the neck of the son of Amram. His friend would reply, are you surprised that the one in charge of building the Mishkan would be wealthy? My understanding of this text is they're saying, look how thick his neck is, meaning look how much jewelry he's wearing. In other words,
it's like Mr. T.
Look how much he must have siphoned off from the communal funds to make himself look the way he does. So, like Jews in every other generation, there were people who were, like politics, who like to stir up, trolling and smear campaigns. This is what they like to do.
It's jealousy.
Jealousy, plain and simple. So they weren't free of that in that generation either. And so what happened as a result of this accusation, or the accusations, I should say, so in text 2b we read, when Moshe heard this, he said, by your lives, when the Mishkan is complete, I will give you an account of all the Mishkan's funds. When it was completed, he said, come, let's make an accounting. Hence the verse states, these are the numbers of the Mishkan. Eile Pekudei HaMishkan, which is next week's Parshas Pekudei. It's all about an accounting of exactly where every dime, every nickel, and every dime, and every penny went in the building of the Mishkan. Now here, when he started giving an accounting, we find that Moshe encountered a little bit of a problem. And that is that he couldn't remember what he did with a certain amount of silver. In text number 2c, let's see what it says. Moshe said to them, these are the numbers of the Mishkan, such and such was spent on the Mishkan. While he was sitting and calculating, he forgot what was done with the sum of 1,775 shekels, which were used as hooks for the pillars of the Mishkan. He was sitting, wondering what to do. He said, now the Jewish people will have a pretext to say Moshe took it. He couldn't remember what they did with it. So what did he do? God illuminated his eyes, and he saw the silver used as hooks for the pillars of the Mishkan. At that moment, all of Israel were appeased regarding the work of the Mishkan. So here you see that Moshe himself, there was something that slipped his mind. He couldn't remember what did he do with all the silver, and God helped him remember. You actually made you made hooks for the Mishkan, all the hooks that held up the canvases or the curtains on the outside, or at some point, this is what you used the silver for. So this was in terms of the rabble-rousers and the conspiracy theories that were abound. But then just in terms of making the Mishkan itself, you would think that everything was that simple. We had Betzalel, we had Oholiav, two great architects, and brilliant. They had a brilliant talent with working with their hands. But we also know from the Talmud that it wasn't just a physical talent, but actually they understood a lot about the spiritual makeup of the world, and how it was through certain formulations of Hebrew letters that the world was created, and they were able to channel that information and that knowledge into making the Aron, the ark that housed the Luchas, that housed the Torah. This was the work of Betzalel. It was specifically him. Something the Talmud says, and we talked about that many years ago. When I first came, I gave one of the lessons of Parshas Truma were about this. Okay. But making the menorah was especially difficult for Moshe. Let's take a look at text number 3. The verse states, the menorah shall be made of hammered work. When Moshe had difficulty with the menorah, God said to him, take a kikar, which is a certain amount of gold, throw it into the fire and remove it. It will be made on its own, with its knobs, flowers, goblets, and arms protruding from it. You bang with a hammer, and it will take shape on its own. Therefore, the verse states, the menorah shall be made of hammered work. It does not say, you shall make, meaning it shall be made on its own. What did Moshe do? He took the kikar and threw it into the fire. He said, Master of the universe, here the kikar has been thrown into the fire. As you wish, let it be made before you. Immediately the menorah emerged complete. That's what the Medrash explains. There's another explanation which is a little closer to pshat, meaning the straightforward understanding. Why would God throw something into the fire? What's the idea of having him throw it into the fire? That fire has many colors. So when God shows Moshe what it might look like, in other words, how to make it, anything that's complicated, anything sophisticated is color-coded. The Rebbe actually says this in one of his talks. Anything that's sophisticated is color-coded. Open any electronic device. Wires carrying current from one place to the other is going to be color-coded. So the idea of the fire was that it was color-coded. And it showed Moshe, through colors, how it should be constructed. That's one explanation. It's a little closer to the pshat, but over here we just learned the Medrash, which says that basically it was the work of God. Moshe takes the gold, puts it into a fire, and God forms the menorah. It was something that Moshe had a difficulty understanding.
So did that make the menorah more holy than the rest of the utensils?
No.
But God made it, so I would think that it would be more holy.
But not to my knowledge. So maybe it was, but I definitely don't know about it. So that's okay. A lot of things I don't know. But from what I understand, the menorah had the same level of holiness as all the other kalim of the Mishkan, which were used, especially in the Heichel. I mean, the menorah, the shulchan, the mizbeach ha'akteres, the mizbeach hazov, meaning the golden altar. These were the three major ones that were right there in front of the ark. Okay. Another one of the conspiracies that were they spun was the question as to whether God's presence can actually rest, can actually dwell in this edifice being created by Moshe Rabbeinu. Does it make sense that the divine presence will be here? Let's take a look in text number 4. When God told Moshe to build him a Mishkan, Moshe immediately told the Jewish people of God's command, as the verse says, speak to the children of Israel, and they shall take from me an offering from every person whose heart inspires him to generosity. You shall take my offering. As Moshe worked on the Mishkan, the scoffers of Israel would say, is it possible that the divine presence will rest through the work of the son of Amram? Rabbi Yochanan said, for 6 months he worked on the Mishkan. For 3 months he assembled it, and for 3 months it lay disassembled. Nevertheless, they would scoff and say, look, the Mishkan is complete. Didn't Moshe say the divine presence would now rest amongst us? In other words, they were saying, look, the Mishkan has been built already. It took them just 3 months to finish it. So again, let's get a timeline over here. Moshe comes down from the mountain on Yom Kippur. The next day, this is the Day of Atonement. That's when God forgives the Jewish people. The next day, Machras Yom Kippurim, the day after Yom Kippurim. So Moshe is told by God, and he transmits this to the Jewish people, that God wants you to build a Mishkan, wants you to build a tabernacle. To do what? To help rectify and atone for the sin of the golden calf. So what happens? They start bringing all of the materials are brought, and it takes 3 months to complete the building of the Mishkan. But it's not until Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is 6 months later, that the Mishkan is actually inaugurated. It takes time. So for 3 months, it basically is lying dormant. The divine presence hadn't yet, manifested. It did not manifest itself yet in the Mishkan. And so what were the scoffers saying? The scoffers were saying, didn't Moshe tell us that the divine presence is going to dwell in this? Look what's going on. It's sitting here for 3 months. So what happens? But God intended for the Mishkan to be erected in the month of Isaac's birth, which is the month of Nisan. So Moshe did not erect it until the month arrived, and God said to Moshe, on the day of the first month you shall set up the Mishkan of the tent of meeting. Then the divine spirit said, let lying lips become mute. That's a quote. To those who scoffed about Moshe, once God told Moshe to erect the Mishkan, they began to load it up, and each person came from his work. As the verse states, they brought the Mishkan to Moshe. So you have to wonder, if all of this stuff is going on behind the scenes, why isn't any of this represented in the written text? Why, when we look at the written text of the Torah, do we not find any reference to all of this? It seems like it's all in the oral tradition. It seems like it's not brought down anywhere in the Psukim, and the Torah doesn't seem to want us to know about it just by reading the text at face value. So I'm going to rewind a little bit in history. We're going to go back to the narrative of creation, where we have a similar pattern, where the Torah itself describes the narrative of creation, the whole way the heavens and the earth are created. And if you look in the oral tradition, we see that it's not so simple. When we just read the text in Parshas Bereshis, it seems like a beautiful God created the world in 6 days. It's very nice, very old, everything's great, right? But once we start looking in Torah Sheba'al Peh, into the oral tradition, in the Talmud, in the Medrash, etc., so there's a lot more to the picture than we're seeing. So let's begin in text 5a. In the beginning of God's creation of the heavens and earth, as Rashi continues in 5b, he says God's creation of the heavens and the earth, but it does not say of God's creation of, meaning the verse does not use the name Elokim instead of God's 4-letter name, which expresses kindness. In the beginning, God intended to create it with a divine standard of judgment, but he perceived that the world would not endure. So he preceded it with a divine standard of mercy, allying it with a divine standard of judgment. That is the reason it is written, on the day the Lord God, Hashem Elokim, made earth and heaven. I think there's a mistake over here in the translation. Because what it should be is V'yomar bara Hashem, meaning bara Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. It says bara Elokim.
Yes, I was thinking about it.
Yeah, so there's a mistake over here in the translation. So at the very beginning of creation, God already started running into issues, as it were, with his creation. Initially, he wanted to create the world, as he says over here, B'midas Hadin, just with the attribute of judgment. Bara Elokim. But he noticed, or he took heed of the fact, took notice of the fact that if he were to do that, if he were to create the entire creation just through the dimensions, just through the characteristic of severity, what would that do to reality for us? That would create a very severe reality, in the sense that if we were to deviate from what God wants us to do in just a very little bit, then it would exact immediate punishment. God didn't want reality to be like that because we wouldn't be able to withstand that. And if we were to, in fact, sin, it would be impossible to return because you sinned. The only way there's room for return, for atonement, is if there's some mercy mixed into the, some mercy in the mix. If there's also some mercy that counterbalances some of the severity, then there's room to discuss atonement, return. But without that, what do you mean? You sinned. You don't belong here. Finish. Goodbye. So initially, God thinks of creating the world with severity. He notices that it's not really going to be successful. And we learned a whole lengthy Hasidic discourse all about this medrash. You remember that? Just in case anybody doesn't know, 5:55 every morning for 15 minutes, we study Chassidus here. And if you want to listen to that Chassidus shir, just 15 minutes, you can get onto our WhatsApp group, and you'll get the Chassidus shir every morning. sent to your phone. And you just have to text me with your number, 201-362-2712. Okay, so that's the first thing that God encounters, as it were, as if God didn't know, as if, of course, God knew of all these things. We're talking about as it played out. There was a challenge here, a challenge there, at least from our perspective. The next day, in other words, on day one, I should say the next day, on day one, so God has some issues with the new creation of light. In text number 6, what happens? Rabbi Eliezer said, by the light that the Holy One, blessed is He, created on the first day, man could observe from one end of the world to the other. But when the Holy One, blessed be He, looked upon the generation of the flood and the generation of the dispersion, and saw that their ways were corrupt, He arose and concealed it from them, as it is stated, and from the wicked their light is withheld. And for whom did He conceal this light? For the righteous people in the future, as it is stated, and God saw the light, that it was good. Good refers to none other than the righteous. As it is stated, say of the righteous that it shall be good for them, for they shall eat the fruit of their actions. I should note that according to some sources, this light, which is gonze, which God concealed for the time to come, for the righteous in the time to come, this light is somewhat accessible through the Hanukkah candles, the Hanukkah lights. This is what's brought down. So, God sees that light that He used to create the world initially, that wasn't going to work. So what does He opt for? Light 2.0. So God had to kind of switch gears here. So the theological questions we're not going to get into, like how does it work? What do you mean? God didn't foresee this? Of course God foresaw it. So the theological questions we won't address tonight, but we want to bring out a whole different point from this whole discussion. We'll see in a minute. What happens next? At least in our narrative. The Torah describes how God makes all plantation, all vegetation grow. So it says in the text number 7a, and God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, seed yielding herbs, and fruit trees producing fruit, according to its kind in which its seed is found on the earth. And it was so. So Rashi picks up on the words, Eitz oise pri, and he tells us on the words fruit trees, Eitz pri, he says like this, in text 7b, that the taste of the tree should be like the taste of the fruit. Are there any trees like that, by the way? Huh? An esrog.
Oh, it is? Really?
I believe so. Yeah.
I don't think there's any other tree.
Nothing else?
No.
Esrog is the only one. So the earth did not do so. You hear? The earth did not do so. However, as it is stated, the earth gave forth trees producing fruit, but the trees themselves were not fruit. Therefore, when man was cursed because of his iniquity, the earth too was punished for its iniquity and was cursed. In other words, God waited to punish the earth until man was punished, because if He punished the earth first, then it would turn out that man would be punished before he deserves to be punished, by punishing the earth, because the earth is his sustenance. So God waits to punish the earth until man is punished. What is it punished for? It's punished for not doing what it was told to do. This is also a theological question, like what's the story? I didn't know the earth has free choice. So the commentary, Yefei Toar, on the Medrash, the commentary Yefei Toar, which is a brilliant, beautiful commentary, and there's so much, and every single page of the Yefei Toar that he describes, there's so much to learn from it. Every time I open it up, just randomly, I find stuff, and I find myself putting in little cards just to remember where I saw what I saw, just because I can go back to it. So the Yefei Toar says that we're referring here not to the earth in terms of its physical matter, but its spiritual origin. As we know, that the Medrash tells us that there is no blade of grass that doesn't have a malach, a angel above, shemaka bay v'omer legdal, which smites it and says, grow. In other words, there's a malach that's compelling every blade of grass. It's a unique malach, meaning a unique energy, divine energy, that's behind the physical growth of anything.
But didn't that all that happen in the sixth day? Just before man was created?
Regardless of when it happened, the fact is it didn't listen. So what does it mean it didn't listen? Not that the earth itself didn't listen, but the angel or the sar, the spiritual source above. And that also poses a huge theological question, because generally speaking, we don't recognize anything to have autonomy other than God. So that's another question we'll keep that for a Stump the Rabbi session, God willing.
And man also has autonomy.
Man does, but we didn't know that a malach has autonomy.
No, he has a mission.
He has a mission, he's got to fulfill the mission. Jeff, what were you going to say?
Yeah, there was some story not too long ago about some river, and the rabbi went across, but it was something to do with the water. It had an agreement during the creation,
Yes.
in order for it to act a certain way at a certain time.
For sure.
I don't remember the
Famous.
full name.
It's a famous Talmudic story, and we talked about it a number of times. I think last year or 2 years ago, we had a whole Torah studies lesson all about it.
Yeah.
Genoi, it's called the River Genoi. Pichas ben Yara was the name of the sage, and he comes to the river and he says, "Split." It's a long story. Anyways, let's go back to our discussion here. Another protest here, another seemingly unplanned or unexpected delay or twist in the story of the creation. On the fourth day, it was the moon's turn to give God some grief. In text number 8, this is from the Talmud, Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi raises a contradiction between two verses. It is written, and God made the two great lights, and it is also written, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. So which one is it? Did God make two great lights? Or was there a great light for the day and a great light, or a lesser light for the nighttime? So the moon said before the Holy One, blessed be He, Master of the universe, is it possible for two kings to serve with one crown? God therefore said to the moon, you're right. Go and diminish yourself. Many years ago we had a great JLI course called Curious Tales of the Talmud, and this was one of the curious tales. It was a beautiful lesson. I'm not sure if I have the audio of that somewhere hidden, but regardless, it was a beautiful explanation of this particular statement of the Talmud. She said before him, Master of the universe, since I said a correct observation before you, must I diminish myself? Just because I said the right thing, just because I made a right observation, therefore I deserve? God said to her, as compensation, go and rule both during the day along with the sun and during the night. She said to him, what use is a candle in the middle of the day? God said to her, go, let the Jewish people count the days and years with you, and this will be your greatness. She said to him, but the Jewish people will count with the sun as well, as it is impossible that they will not count seasons with it. As it is written, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. So God said to her, go, let righteous men be named after you. Just as you are called the lesser, Hakotan, light, there will be Yaakov Hakotan, Shmuel Hakotan, and David Hakotan. God saw that the moon was not appeased. So he said to the Jews, offer a sacrifice to atone for the fact that I diminished the moon. Which is fascinating. God wants us to offer a sacrifice because He diminished the moon. It's so peculiar. Rab Shimon ben Lakish said regarding this matter, why is the goat offering of Rosh Chodesh unique among all sacrifices, in that it is regarded in Scripture as being for God? The idea is that God said, this goat offering shall be an atonement for the fact that I diminished the moon. So it's very bizarre. But again, we're not going to go into this discussion itself tonight. The point here is that this is not obvious in the written text. And the Talmud is telling us kind of some of the behind the scenes, what was going on. It's as if the moon was speaking to God, as if there was this dialogue in the spiritual realm between the forces, or between the spiritual sar, the spiritual entity in charge of these entities within the world. It's as if they had this dialogue with God. Okay. Another very bizarre teaching over here that if we just read the Torah itself, we don't notice. In text number 9, and God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that crawls, with which the waters swarmed, according to their kind, and every winged fowl according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So Rashi points out in text number 10a, and this comes from the Medrash, the great sea monsters. What does this refer to? The great fish in the sea. In the Aggadah, this refers to the Leviathan and its mate. For he created them male and female, and he slew the female and salted her away for the righteous in the future. For if they would propagate, the world would not exist because of them. So we have these two great sea monsters, one a male, one a female, and God says, you know what? It's not really going to work. If we allow these two to dominate and to propagate, I should say, they'll dominate, they'll eat everything up, and they'll destroy everything, and nothing will be left. So we have to remove the female from the equation. And if you think that's the end of it, in text 10b we read how when God creates man, so this was also controversial. Text number 10b, Rabbi Shimon said, when the Holy One, blessed is He, was about to create Adam Harishon, the first man, the angels split into groups. Some said, let not man be created. Others said, let man be created. The attribute of kindness said, let man be created, for he will perform acts of kindness. The attribute of truth said, let not man be created, for he will be full of lies. The attribute of righteousness said, let man be created, for he will perform acts of righteousness. The attribute of peace said, let not man be created, for he will be full of quarrels. What did God do? He took truth and threw it to the ground. He took truth and threw it into the ground. As the verse states, he threw truth to the ground. Okay. The serving angel said before God, Master of the universe, why are you disgracing your seal of truth? Lift truth from the earth. This then is the meaning of the verse, truth will sprout from the earth. Emes me'eretz titzmach. Emes me'eretz titzmach. The truth will sprout from the earth. So you see, creating the human being wasn't all that easy. There was a huge debate. Should we create him like this, create him like that, or not create him at all? So every day there's another setback. Every day there's another change of plans. No? How do you think God feels about that? I think he felt despondent, discouraged, depressed. So what does the Torah actually say when everything is complete? In text number 11, and God saw that all he had made, and behold, it was very good. And it was evening, and it was morning, the sixth day. It was great. Everything was beautiful. It was very good. I'm going to skip over the next section. And when, it was very good. Yeah, it was very good. We can go back over here to this later if we have time. But it was very good. Why was it very good? Why was it very good? So, just as there was a group of senior citizens who were sitting and talking at the breakfast table at their senior citizen home in Florida somewhere. And one of them says, you know, my arms are so weak, I can barely hold this cup of coffee. No. What does the other one say? Yeah, I know, my cataracts are so bad that I can barely even see my cup of coffee. No. The other one says, I can't even turn my head because of the arthritis in my neck. The other one says, my blood pressure, it makes me dizzy. The other one says, I guess that's the price we pay for getting old. No. Then there was a short moment of silence, and somebody else speaks up and says, well, also another elderly person. It could be worse. It could be worse. Thank God we can all drive. Thank God we can all still drive. So, with the cataract and with the arm and with all of this, they're still driving. I guess that's the way it works in Florida, at least. Watch out. Watch out when you drive in Florida.
My daughter-in-law has a grandmother great-grandmother that's driving at 99 playing tennis and whatnot.
That's wonderful. That's fantastic.
He plays tennis?
Yeah, plays tennis, does crossword puzzles, drives
gosh.
around and plays.
Okay, so what's the point here? The point is that when we read the Torah Shebiksav, we read the written Torah, we don't notice all of these narratives. We don't see all of these narratives. It's only something we're informed of when we read the oral tradition. So what does it mean for us? What's the message here? The message is that we could tell our story of our lives. We each have a story to tell. And when we tell our story, there's two ways we can tell that story. We can tell the story like the written text of the Torah tells the story. God created the world, 6 days and 6 nights. 6 days he creates the world. And he looks around and it's beautiful. Kitayv, it's beautiful, it's wonderful. Yeah, there was some glitches along the way, there was some snags along the way. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's great, it's beautiful. He doesn't mention all of the different things that happened, all the challenges, all the problems, all the protests, all the conspiracy theories that came up. He doesn't talk about that. Makes no mention of it. So when we talk about our lives, we could talk about it one way. We could look at it one way. Or we can start kvetching. You know, I had this issue, and I had the other issue, and I had a family member who did this to me, and a partner who messed me over and stole half my money, more than half my money, all my money. There are two ways we can read the tale of our lives. We can read the narrative. The Torah tells us that when God finishes the world, he says, creating the world, he says, V'hinei toiv, it's good. What does V'hinei toiv refer to? It's good. What is good? So this is a fascinating medrash. The medrash in Kehelis Rabbah tells us in text number 15, it is good refers to the human inclination to do good. It is very good. When God says it's V'hinei toiv ma'od, it's very good. What is that a reference to? To the human inclination to do evil.
So that's good.
It is very good. Not just good. It is very good. Why is it very good? We've spoken about this a number of times. I believe in the course, What Is? If I remember correctly, I think we discussed it there. This whole idea of when God creates an entity such as the evil inclination, what is its purpose? Its purpose is to bring about the best in us. That's the only reason why it exists. So we can choose to become victims of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination. We can fall prey to its machinations. We could do that. And we could choose to do the wrong thing. But the real reason why we're having this experience of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination within our lives, is for the purpose of Tov Ma'od, of being very good. Because the challenge, the darkness, the difficulty, that actually prompts us to catapult forward in a way that we would have never done without it. It's like the famous analogy that we've used. It's brought down in Hasidic texts that when you have a river and you want to increase the pressure of the river, in the flow of the river. So what do? You'll take stones, you'll pile up the stones in the middle of the river, and you create a dam. And as the water builds up until it bursts through the dam, and that burst of energy, that burst of power, that thrust that comes through the dam is greater than any energy that would have flowed before. The water would have never flowed with such with such power, with such might, as it does when it's withheld, when there's some resistance. When the resistance builds and builds and builds and finally gives way, wow. That's Tov Ma'od, that's very good. And so in a similar way, the Yetzer Hara fills that purpose. That's its function. That's why we have the Yetzer Hara. So it really is all a matter of perspective sometimes. How we're viewing those experiences that we have. And so this is something that we need to always bear in mind when we're looking out at our lives. What is the narrative of our life? Is it trouble after trouble after trouble, difficulty after difficulty after difficulty? Or is it, thank God I'm alive, I'm breathing, I have a family, a nice family, I have whatever it might be that's positive in your life, looking at it from that perspective. And that's something we might be able to learn from this dual or parallel, these parallel tales of the creation of the Mishkan and the creation of the world. If we just read it inside the Hebrew text, inside the written text of the Torah, you wouldn't know anything. It's beautiful. Everything works out very nicely. Of course, there are some glitches here and there, but doesn't hold a candle. It pales in comparison to the conspiracy theories we hear about in the oral tradition and how it's only alluded to in the text. So when we tell our story, when we think about our story, we share our story, it should be like the written text. Okay, let's take a look at text number 16a. And this sikha, this talk that the Rebbe gave, I believe is from the year 1972 or 73, and it was on the occasion of his father-in-law's yahrzeit, meaning the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe's yahrzeit on Yud Shvat, 10th day of Shvat, the month of Shvat. And one of the things the Rebbe was pointing out was that his father-in-law was an immigrant, obviously, from war-torn Europe. He was plucked out from the Warsaw Ghetto during bombings by the Germans. And the Gestapo themselves, it was a whole miraculous story. At that point, the United States still had diplomatic ties with Germany. And so, using many channels, miraculously, the Gestapo themselves sent in somebody or a team of people into Warsaw to take the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe to Berlin. This is already after the war started. And from there, they sent him off to Riga. And from there, he was able to get to the United States. So he was suffering, I believe, from Parkinson's. He was bound to a wheelchair. He had suffered numerous strokes, perhaps. I don't remember exactly the details, but he was a very sick, physically ill person. And you might think that he would be embittered by the time he got here. And especially seeing the resistance that he got when he came here in trying to rebuild that which was lost and to resuscitate American Jewry. He got a lot of resistance for that. He came here and he said, America, the very first, and perhaps even on the ship he already said it, or when he first came at his first public meeting, he said, America is nicht anders. He said, America is not going to be any different. It's no different. It's not going to be any different. We're going to create yeshivas here. We're going to have Torah, thriving Torah communities, and Torah societies. We're going to have that just as we had it previously. And people didn't really buy into it at first. They didn't really believe it was going to be possible. They actually suggested that they pay for him to spend the rest of his life in a nursing home, in a very nice, honorable place, but where they could take care of him and he'll be good. Everything will be good. He said no. He went and he moved into 770 and started yeshiva immediately that day. He started yeshiva the very first day he landed in America. Started yeshiva, so he wasn't bitter about what happened. He wasn't bitter about what he was experiencing. He was looking at the world positively. And the final discourse that he published before his passing, now I just have to add parenthetically, It's always understood and always assumed that the Rebbes kind of had a sense before they were about to pass what was going to happen. And so he published a discourse in honor of his grandmother's yahrzeit, or his mother's, I don't remember, but I think her yahrzeit was also Yud Shvat, or Gimel Shvat, the 13th of Shvat, I believe. So he publishes this discourse, and the beginning words, the opening words are a verse that has the words Basi Lagani, that God says, "I've come to my garden." Basi Lagani, speaking of this world, speaking of the physical world, God speaks of it as a garden. What's a garden? What's the difference between a garden and a field, for example? It's very obvious. In a garden, you'll have beautiful fruits, beautiful flowers, very well taken care of. God doesn't just look at this world as a field that has some kind of crops growing, but it's a beautiful place. It's pretty. It's a place where you want to take a stroll, where you want to come and relax, you want to dwell there. So God speaks of this world as Basid Gai. I've come to my garden. And so from that discourse, it became the Rebbe's discourse that he began his Nesias, when he took the mantle of leadership, he began his discourse with these words, Basid Lagani. And again, the Rebbe is pointing out here that what he chose to focus on was the colorful, beautiful landscape, the beautiful backdrop against which he was working and he was living in. So in text 16a, when we look about with physical eyes, don't forget this is only a few years after the Holocaust, we only perceive the physical aspects in all that we see. And we naturally wonder, what is happening with the world? The situation is steadily deteriorating from one generation to the next, and even from 1 year to the next. Goodness does not prevail. Conditions are not improving. Holy and spiritual values do not dominate. This is especially true with regard to Jewish concerns. Our nation has always been a small minority among the world's inhabitants, and this is certainly the case today. Such thoughts easily lead to the conclusion that this world is but a jungle dominated by vicious animals, and that it certainly does not remotely resemble a garden that yields edible fruit. Such thoughts also lead to dejection and despair. How can we hope to affect and change the world for the better if the situation is consistently degenerating? If we reach this conclusion, even if we dutifully obey and continue to study Torah and do good deeds, we will lack the morale and happiness that is necessary to fulfill our mission and properly serve God, inasmuch as it appears that we will certainly fail. For the world is no more than a wild jungle ruled by vicious beasts. That's what happens when we look out at the world through physical, fleshly eyes. That's what it looks like. But that's only one way of looking at the story. That's one way of spinning the narrative. But there's a radically different way to look at it. In text 16b, he continues, we must know that the world is a garden, not just a field that yields grain, which is necessary in order to subsist, but a garden that yields luxurious fruits that provide enjoyment and pleasure. Moreover, the pleasure provided by a given entity is subjective, its extent determined by the needs and taste of its owners. This world is not just anyone's garden, it's God's garden. I can still hear the way the Rebbe says it with such, this is on a video, it's captured on video. This is God's garden. It's not just any garden, it's God's garden. So when God says about a place that it's His garden, it is a real, veritable garden. It's a true garden. You can be sure that there is a garden here. You can be sure that there is pleasurable, delightful things to be discovered in this world. As the verse states, I have come to my garden. Its goodness is therefore measured according to His infinite terms. And this is something that Rebbe was pointing out, that when God says that something is so, that it is true on His terms. So if this world is a garden, that means it's the real type of garden. It's the real deal. We perceive of a garden in a certain way, within our context. If God is saying, speaking of this world as it is, that it's a garden that produces beautiful, edible fruit that we can benefit from and derive pleasure from, this is the real thing. It's by God's measures, by God's standards, it's a beautiful garden. what do we need to do? We need to open up our eyes. In text 16c. With this perspective, we view the world differently. And when we do so, we begin to notice things that we missed at first glance. When we realize that it is our responsibilities to constantly be on the search, we endeavor to look around us and perceive that which is beneath the shell, the fruit that is under the peel. We are confident that we will successfully uncover the garden that is latent in creation because the Torah tells us that it is indeed there, waiting to be discovered. The knowledge that we will surely find precious fruit, fruit that God says is a part of the garden in which He dwells, infuses us with supreme confidence and enthusiasm. I just want to stop here for a second and explain what he's saying. He's saying, as a Jewish person who believes in what the Torah says, so here God says in the Torah, this is my garden. That gives us the greatest confidence and trust that, in fact, if we dig hard enough, if we dig and we're diligent, we will discover those beautiful dimensions of the world. We simply need to try. So if the Torah says it is there, we can be sure we can go to the bank with it. We could take it to the bank.
Are we talking about the Garden of Eden?
No.
What garden are we talking about?
The world as a garden, which is a beautiful place.
The whole world.
The entire world, not just the Garden of Eden. Knowing that a precious treasure awaits discovery, we remain focused on our task and do not allow ourselves to be sidetracked by other endeavors. So this is another point that he's making here. Once we know that it's there, we're going to keep on going at it. We're going to go at it and go at it and go at it until we find it. We're not going to allow ourselves to be distracted and divert our attention from the goal. We're going to keep our eye on the goal. We must know that we inhabit a wonderful world. The evil inclination endeavors in every possible way to obscure the world's preciousness, in the hope that we lose all hope, God forbid, or at least to lull us into doing the bare required minimum. Through contemplating the above, however, we assuredly traverse through life, secure in the knowledge that we will find the fruits of God's garden. One final text that we'll take a look at over here before we conclude, before we wrap this up, and that's in text number 17. This is a letter from the Rebbe where he adopts a similar stance in writing to somebody. As is well known, people would write to the Rebbe about all kinds of circumstances, literally all kinds of circumstances, medical questions, monetary questions, spiritual questions, domestic issues, meaning shalom bayis, interpersonal issues, relationships. There wasn't a topic that didn't cross his desk, that people didn't ask him about. He would receive probably 200-300 envelopes a day. Sacks and sacks of mail would come in, and he insisted on opening every single one of them that was addressed to him. Of course, he had secretaries, a number of secretaries that helped him out, but this was something that there was a huge part of the Rebbe's work, was corresponding with people and writing to people. So we have a true oitzer, true treasure chest of correspondence from the Rebbe in his 34 hitherto published volumes. There are more volumes to be published of letters, Hebrew letters, and there are multiple volumes of English letters that were published, and some of it's available on Chabad.org for free. Actually, you can search the topics there. So it's truly a real gift. It's just a gift to read from the Rebbe's, the missives that he conveyed, that he gave to people, that he sent to people, with real life advice. Like I'm just looking at something today. It's not even published in one of the official works. It's kind of like a little note that he would send out. Like somebody would send a letter. So if you wanted the secretary to respond, like over the phone, so you would write a note on the side of the paper, and they would convey that response. So I was reading something about OCD. Somebody asked the Rebbe, what do I do with my OCD? You would think, why would you go to the Rebbe, a Chassidic rabbi, about OCD? You go to a psychologist, someone with a degree, with a PhD, with a plaque hanging on the wall. Why are you going to a Chassidic Rebbe who doesn't have a plaque? He has some old textbooks sitting on his shafa, on his bookcase. But the Rebbe had good advice for him. I could share that response with you if you'd like. after the lesson. It's fascinating. So he writes like this in text number 17, I acknowledge receipt of your letter despite its tone and content. That I was noting the tone and the content, meaning very negative. I have not, God forbid, lost hope that eventually you will appreciate the good in life, including the good in your own life, and that this appreciation will impact your emotions and frame of mind. In our world, everything is a mixture of good and bad. Human beings must choose which aspects they will emphasize, contemplate, and pursue. In everyone's life, there are two paths, to see the good or the opposite. How instructive is that which our sages tell us, that Adam was an ingrate. The first human being created was an ingrate. Even before he was banished from the Garden of Eden, while living in a literal paradise, he complained about his circumstances. Must have been Jewish. On the other hand, there were Jewish men and women who thanked and blessed the Creator and recited the morning blessings while living through the most horrifying times in the German concentration camps. Ultimately, everyone's circumstances will be somewhere between these two extremes. Either between being in the Garden of Eden like Adam Harishon, who had literally everything at his fingertips, anything he wanted, and somebody who had nothing, absolutely nothing, was a prisoner. Needless to say, my intention is not to imply that anyone deserves suffering, God forbid. No, we don't deserve suffering. I mean, nor are we in the position to make that judgment call, because we're not God. My point is simply to underscore the reality. The type of lives that we live, whether full of satisfaction and meaning or the opposite, depends in large measure on our willpower, which dictates whether we will focus on the positive or the negative. So taking this back all the way full circle, we started the lesson by talking about the Mishkan and how the Mishkan was created with such speed. People came with all the elements that were necessary, all the components that were necessary. And just by reading the text, it seems like it was all beautiful. A building campaign, as I said, without any YouTube videos, without any charity campaigns. This was just 1, 2, 3. In a short amount of time, they had all the stuff they needed. And so much that they had to say, sorry, we have enough already, thank you. But if you go into the oral tradition, we uncover a whole new layer of things, of what was really going on. There was conspiracy theories, there was jealousy, there was accusations flying back and forth. Moshe, you stole money. No, I didn't steal money. That's where we have the whole Parshas Pikudei. So the question is, how do we read the narrative of our lives? Let's read the narrative of our lives as the Torah Shebiksav, as the written Torah. Sometimes we don't have to necessarily share all of the snags along the way, all the difficulties, the challenges, the dark moments. No, life is a beautiful life. We have to just mine it. We have to mine it for its treasures that it has along the way. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to everybody who's watching us online. And God willing, next week we'll be here at the same place, same time, same channel.